Tens of thousands of people have joined anti-racism demonstrations across the UK, despite government appeals for protesters to stay at home because of fears of spreading the coronavirus. Many taking to the streets did wear face coverings and gloves. London, Manchester, Cardiff, Leicester and Sheffield were some of the places that saw the Black Lives Matter protests following the killing of George Floyd in the US city of Minneapolis last month. The demonstrations were largely peaceful, but there were some clashes with police outside Downing Street this evening, with mounted officers driving back some protesters along Whitehall. With more, here's Chichi Azundu.
Early evening, after the official end of the protest, police were trying to clear Whitehall.
Oh my God, the horse is bolted!
The officer knocked herself off her horse, it bolted into the crowd and trampled a protester. Both are now receiving medical care.
This is exactly what organisers called not to happen. Just at the end of the protest, when the heavens had opened, trouble started.
Despite heavy rain, groups stayed behind, throwing bottles and flares at officers. Other protesters called for calm. Peaceful is what the main event had been. A much larger number had turned up than expected. But this is a movement growing with each protest, not only over the death of African-American George Floyd last month after a white police officer knelt on his neck, but to highlight that the UK is not innocent when it comes to racism.
We are here to unite, because what we are fighting for is to stop institutional racism. Yeah?
The government had appealed for people to stay away.
We are in a health pandemic across the United Kingdom, and coronavirus is a deadly virus. And of course, I'd say to those that want to protest, please don't. The regulations are very clear, you know, in terms of gatherings and mass gatherings in particular. We must put public health first at this particular time.
Organisers handed out masks and gloves and told people to keep 2 meters apart. But as the crowd grew, space diminished.
Us going out, it's just not defying the government. We're still going to be careful, but it's to say that actually this is urgent and this needs an urgent action.
But London isn't the only place taking a peaceful stand. In Belfast, they managed social distancing during their demonstration. In Manchester, an estimated 15,000 people gathered in and around Piccadilly Square.
I'm from America, so this is just a really big deal to see this impacting the world so far from home. It's actually pretty fantastic.
In Sheffield, thousands of protesters took the knee, a peaceful symbolic gesture against racial inequality and police brutality that's fast becoming the emblem of this time. This is one voice with one message, Black Lives Matter. And as thousands gathered in towns and cities around the UK, theirs is a hope that they'll be heard and real change can start. Chichi Azundu, BBC News.
Well, in America, Washington, D.C. saw some of the biggest protests in more than a week of demonstrations over the death of George Floyd. And our correspondent Aleem Maqbool is there for us. Aleem, 12 days of demonstrations now and still huge crowds where you are.
Yeah, the biggest so far, undoubtedly. Thousands upon thousands of people, families, children, not just on this side of the White House, but right around the building. It remained peaceful, good-natured, but of course with a very serious message. But while this demonstration was going on, so too was a memorial service at a conference center in Rayford, North Carolina. That's where George Floyd was born. He was killed, of course, in Minneapolis. His body was brought down from there. And this is the first in 4 days of memorial events for George Floyd that will culminate in his funeral in Houston, Texas on Tuesday. But here, what has been interesting, speaking to people in Washington, D.C., as opposed to other days, is when we say, well, what is the message for the president, the man in that building behind me? A lot of people now saying, well, it's moved beyond that. A lot of people don't expect him to do the right thing. What this is about now is about influencing police, about individuals, about police forces. It's not about the president anymore.
OK, Aleem, thank you. Aleem Maqbool there in Washington, D.C. Now, protests have also been taking place in Australia, again, despite government calls for people to stay away because of the coronavirus. The demonstrators focused on the treatment of Indigenous Australians. Shama Khalil's report does contain some distressing images.
Black Lives Matter!
A day of high tempers and high spirits for protesters in central Sydney. Politicians had urged them to stay away, fearing another wave of COVID-19.
I say to them, don't go. Not because you shouldn't express your view, find another way to express your view.
But that didn't stop them.
I'm an Aboriginal woman, so it's a subject very close to my heart. And just so nice to see people from all creeds come together for this.
I don't want to be a white person who sits by and does nothing, so that's why I'm here today.
In the past 3 decades, more than 400 Indigenous Australians have died in police custody, an issue many here say has long been ignored. But with the very public killing of George Floyd in the United States, the Aboriginal community is using the international outcry to express their own anger.
This seems all too familiar. A black man, restrained by officers, screaming, "I can't breathe." These were the last minutes of David Dungay Jr.'s life, caught on camera in a Sydney prison hospital in 2015. The inquest into the 26-year-old's death found that the officer's conduct was a result of insufficient training, but his family has called for them to be prosecuted. Seeing George Floyd die in such similar circumstances to her son has been distressing for David's mother.
Tears just come from my eyes and pain came to my heart again. And I say, be strong, the Floyd family, for we are in pain the same and we do understand what you're going through.
Protesters hope marches like this highlight not just black deaths in custody, but the centuries of inequality Indigenous Australians have suffered, and that a newfound momentum could mean a better future for the community. Shaima Khalil, BBC News, Sydney.